Okay, this will be a very short video about replacing the spring loops, the hammer assist spring loops on a Yamaha U1 or U3 action. Very commonly on these Yamaha instruments, the old or even not so old spring loops turn dark brown and start breaking and crumbling. The material almost turns into a powder in many cases. In the worst of cases, they're this solid dark brown, and even if you just rub them between your fingers, they just almost turn to nothing. You can see the smudge on my fingers there. So anyway, they start breaking right and left, and you have to replace them. In order to do that, you've got to take all the hammers off in some cases. In certain U1s and U3s, they will have a brass butt plate, which will allow you to remove the hammer via just loosening that brass plate and popping it out, rather than the standard procedure of unscrewing all of the hammer flanges from the rail. In this case, since you're going to be doing it for the whole action, it's generally easiest to go ahead and remove the hammer rest rail as well, which I've done here. Allows everything to be accessed much more easily. Unhook all of the bridle straps, unscrew. Since in this case, each hammer is numbered, I've been a little bit laissez-faire about keeping track of everything, but in a more ideal circumstance, you probably would have these laid out in groups of 3 or 5. Got all the hammer screws, flange screws over to the side. Then cover this for the moment. The thing that I've found that's most useful for actually clearing out the original string, all of these I've done now, but if you come in with a jigsaw blade, you can see the jigsaw blade has a nice sharp hook at the end. I just made this little handle from a scrap piece of a piano bench leg, which I cut to shape, cut a groove in the one side, placed a jigsaw blade in there and ran a couple of screws through just to give me more control. Because what you're essentially doing is coming in, bracing with your thumb, and using that first hook to grab the spring loop, the spring loop, and then drag it out. It cleans it out really nicely, leaving you with this, see if I can zoom in on that, really, really clean spring loop groove. And then the next thing you need to do is you need to actually make replacement loops. The way I went about that was I took measurements. Let's see, I've got one here which has not been done. Let's just take measurements. It's like a micrometer to get how long the actual spring loop assist needs to be. Take a measurement times 2 of the distance from where it hooks to the spring to the corner of the flange, and then I also took measurements for how far it was running down into the groove and multiplied that times 2, which gave me a size of 1.62 inches. And then you will need a spool of either braided, there are a few different things you can use. In this case, I found some old braided silk spring loop material, or you can use heavy embroidery thread. One other thing that Darren and I tend to use here is a very, very heavy braided fishing line that works well. Anyway, in order to very quickly make 88 spring loops of the right dimensions, I just found what the circumference of a circle with so I wanted a circle with a circumference of 1.6 whatever inches, and it came out to be slightly more than half of an inch. Found a dowel that was sized to half of an inch. I used masking tape to bring it up to the size that I actually wanted, and then just chucked it into a drill, wrapped the first loop of the cordage around here, and then very slowly pressed the trigger on the drill to make a full run of that, running the length of this. And then you just come in with a razor knife and cut those off to make these well-shaped spring loops. Then, after that's done, I'm actually using gel CA glue in order to affix the new loops. While CA glue tends to be a bit brittle, in this application it only has force expressed on the pulling through the groove when it's hooked up, so it's not really something to worry about. And I'm just doing about maybe 3/16 of an inch of glue into the groove here. It's really just kind of bubble up on top. You can maybe see how much I've applied there. It looks like a lot. Then I come in with the spring loop. I start out by going just past the groove where the spring loop is going to rest, and then kind of pinch it with my thumb, floss it down inside here, and then I set it down, unfortunately. There's this tool. You can get a set of these picks and scrapers from Harbor Freight for just a few dollars. One side's kind of a little golf club wedge shape, and the other one is quite sharp. And I'll just use that to tamp it down. I'm using the straight edge one to just press this in. I may end up pulling it out just slightly. Press it into there. Scrape off the excess glue on the surface and make sure none comes around the edge. You do want to make sure you don't get any of this onto the bird's eye. There you go, you can kind of see that there. And if there's any excess glue on my applicator here, I'm just going to run that a few times through there to really seat it in place. At this time, I'm only doing it to one side. It makes it so much easier to work with since we're going to use a different jig, which I'll show in a moment, to affix the second side. But if the one side is already attached and dry, it's so much easier to work with. Anyway, that's the very basics of it. I'll show the end in a moment here.